Welcome to The Truth We Know. So today we have a guest with us, Chedza Ikpe.
Hey.
Some may know her as our co-host's wife, Sam's wife. Yeah.
Hey.
But yeah, we're going to be talking about social justice, and I thought it would be good to get Chedza on the podcast because do you want to tell us about Rara and what you do with Rara, and then we can move on to the topic a little bit?
Yeah. So I'm the co-founder and director of the Rara Education Project, and Rara stands for Real and Authentic Representations of Africans and Caribbeans. It's a bit of a mouthful, but at the heart of hearts, it's looking at how we can pursue racial equality across learning and working spaces. So it requires us to work in community with organisations and all of the above. Yeah.
Okay. You would probably guess is that Chedza is also a Christian. And I guess the first question I have for you today is, to what degree can we as Christians fight for social justice? Can we go out and can we riot, for example? Can we protest? Can we stop the M1 or the M25 like, the Green Party do? Do you get what I mean? So how far can we go?
No comment. I think it's a hard question to ask, and it's something I'm still trying to answer myself, John, if I'm honest with you. I find that in trying to pursue racial equality or trying to address the issue of racial injustice, the question I often ask myself is, through what lens am I engaging in that piece of work? Do I engage with it as a black person first or as a Christian first? Because whichever lens you choose to engage with, that really shapes your means and methods. One conversation that we've had, John, is, do you take a Martin Luther approach or a Malcolm X approach? Yep. What is the motive? What is the heart behind the pursuit of that justice? So if as a black person I am pursuing justice for black people on account of what the white man has done to my people, is it that my justice is to see the white man suffer like my people did? Because then the question, what is justice is really the first question. But then if I'm looking through a faith lens, my understanding of justice is very different from that which we pursue in the world. So in answer to your question, I think, number one, it depends on the definition of justice that you're running with and what lens you're engaging with. Don't know if I'm answering that question.
Yeah, no, you are. And I think some verses come to mind, if you talk about when Christ, refers to an eye for an eye, for example. So in the terms of, is justice me making the perceived enemy or the perceived perpetrator suffer just as much as we have suffered in the past, or my ancestors have suffered in the past, then, as Christians, we'll turn to that and realize that, well, that can't be our aim because we've been told to turn the other cheek, even in the sake. So I guess the difficulty there is looking at it from a Christian perspective, which may not be, in our own worldly understanding, efficient. Because I think when we look at the Malcolm X compared to Martin Luther, some may argue that, Malcolm X method is probably it's a quicker way to success because, you do ostracize a certain people. You say, you know what, that's our enemy. Let's join together. It's easy to combine, put people together when there's a common enemy.
Yeah.
But the problem is that the Christian approach, there is no enemy. Our enemy is spiritual things. It's sin. It's other things. It's not black issues.
Yeah. But even then, though, John, where we see the words of Jesus or the instruction of Jesus in how we ought to engage with our enemy, we have to love our enemy.
Exactly.
Feed the stranger. So even if we do have an apparent enemy that we stand before and that we engage with, that we perceive, it's actually not for me as a Christian to wish ill and to wish to see the downfall of said enemy, said perpetrator. So it almost feels like, sometimes it feels almost a contradiction to engage in the race equality, racial injustice issue while pursuing and holding to these faith principles at the same time. But it then boils down to definitions. What is our working definition? And I think to ensure that I engage with the racial justice work from a Christian lens, the heart of hearts has to be love. So we know that ultimately the instruction of Jesus Christ was to love God and to love your neighbour. Can I pursue racial injustice while loving my neighbour? Hence, I would lean towards the Martin Luther approach in terms of his heart towards the people. Now I can quote that I have a dream, but for him you could see that there was a love pursuit in his pursuit of racial justice.
Yeah, and I think you see that in the fact that he also maybe had a larger following in terms of the fact that he was also able to draw people from other races into the fight with him. Because the problem is if you take the Malcolm X approach, your supporters are only black.
Yeah.
And you basically say, you know what, even though the kind-hearted and the good-hearted, you know, that's quote-unquote white folks, right, who are also there for racial justice, you actually say to them, don't want your help. Because you actually make other people your enemy unnecessarily. So I think even when you look at the Christian approach, I think there is actually wisdom there in the long run. In the long run, I see wisdom there because we want an environment and a society where all are treated equally. But if we start with the aim of making our enemies suffer, then can you say so at some point you're going to now change that aim? No, unfortunately, you've created a generation which will then feed another generation full of hatred. Which is why we find sometimes when we have these discussions, the motivation of many is not a motivation of love.
Yeah.
It's a motivation of must feel
hatred and pain.
What we felt before.
Retaliation. I think two quotes that I absolutely love is that every time someone pulls out eye for an eye, someone tried to use that at me the other day and said, yeah, but in it, Cheds, eye for an eye, that's how it worked. But then but I remember hearing someone say that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. If you're going to gouge my eye out the way that I gouge your eye out, then I've got one eye left and you take my eye out and I take your last eye out. Well, nobody can see then. We're all,
We're blind together.
Literally, we are collectively blind. Do you know what I mean? And now what do we do then? Once we've finished killing everybody off and causing, the uttermost harm. And even you can't fight fire with fire. It's just, we're just going to...
Yeah, I think...
Burn. Burn to crisp. So for me, it's if we're going to use that approach to inflict suffering as a consequence of prior suffering, all we're doing is multiplying the suffering to no betterment of mankind. But I know that a lot of people would disagree with my approach. Hence, I stand by my approach from a place of love, because if we want to see any kind of change, it starts with changing hearts. It really starts. It's a heart issue at the heart of it, and that's maybe where that faith element comes in for me. Understanding the root of injustice is a heart issue.
No, I think that's good because it comes on to my next question, which is how are we able to navigate between the Great Commission, which is for people's salvation, and we understand that salvation is also eternally looking forward. It's not just upon this earth are we in a better circumstance. We're looking at beyond this earth. And we know that, for some Christians, we're called to be persecuted. For some Christians, we're called to suffer. So how do we navigate between, understanding that the most important thing is people's salvation, not necessarily justice upon this earth? Although how bleak that may sound, but that's the truth. Our goal is eternity, not this temporal world that, by best cases, maybe you live up to 85.
Yeah.
You get what I mean? So how do you navigate between giving that message and also fighting for social justice?
Again, that boils down to which lens you're wearing. So at that point, I put my faith lens on to try and understand. So recently, myself and Sam have been studying the Pauline epistles, and this week particularly, we're looking at Paul's instruction to the Corinthian church and how they ought to engage with suffering, how they ought to respond to suffering of any kind. And at the heart of it, Paul was really driving home the point of how is God glorified in all your suffering, in all your affliction, whatever it is that now we're not talking about social injustice or racial injustice there, but suffering as it stands. And in that, I think to engage with the social justice issue is how is God glorified by my methods and means?
Okay.
Am I still modeling the love of Christ or Christ's heart for the people in my approach to this piece of work? Or am I communicating a very different message, an anti-Christ message, by communicating any kind of hatred toward any of God's... These are all God's creation. I don't care what people have done. We are all God's creation. I don't know if I'm answering that for you, John.
No, I think you are. And I think it does bring another question to mind, which, for example, when we had, the George Floyd issue happen and BLM rose up, right? I always had this fight within myself in the fact that I felt as though there were maybe too many negative things that BLM was associated with. So I didn't feel comfortable as a Christian to tie my name to the association. Now, obviously, we found out extra things about the association thereafter, but at the time, we didn't know that information, right? So how do we deal with that as Christians? Like, can we put our names to things that also have negative, viewpoints in society? Because parts of BLM didn't involve rioting, right? But as Christians, we're not advocating for that. So how do you also balance that? How do you make that decision for yourself personally? What you choose
I'm not gonna lie,
put your
John.
name to?
There was an internal conflict in 2020 for me personally. I remember even in church, people asking, "Is taking to the streets the right thing to do? Is it the most Christian thing to do?" And there was so many arguments around how should we respond. Everybody wants to. All the young people in the church wanted to do something about it, and I think the problem I have is something you said recently, John, that the problem with associating with an organisation as wide or as huge as BLM is that there are so many variables beyond your control. So for me to say, right, I'm standing by BLM because this is what they believe and this is what it is, there's just so much that was going on at the time that I wasn't too sure what was the right thing to do. I did not take to the streets personally. Yeah, I posted a picture on the black square that everybody was posting, but I was just like, what is that? I took it off afterwards. I was like, this is doing absolutely jack all.
Yeah.
And that is when Rah Rah happened. Rah Rah was born out of a response of what was going on. We didn't see a rightful response. There were so many people reacting to injustice, and there was so much anger. It was such an emotive time.
Yeah.
But the question that myself and Emma asked was, when all the emotion has subsided, because this is what happens everywhere you go. Something crazy happens, it's all in the news, everyone's talking about it, tweeting about it, and 24 hours, give it 24 hours, give it 1 week, give it 1 month, what are we still doing about it? Are we still upset? Do we still feel that righteous anger about what has occurred? If so, what is the response? And for us, we wanted quite a longevity to our response, that beyond tweeting about it and taking to the streets, then what? A sustainable response to that injustice. So for us, we felt that education was a right way to go about it, which was sitting at table with those we feel have the power to influence the betterment or the advancement of those that are often marginalised and at the face of injustice. But there are different forms of activism and responses to injustice. The scripture tells us to defend the poor, to defend the oppressed, to seek justice on behalf of those that can't, on behalf of themselves. But to answer your question, it was a really difficult time because I didn't know what was the right thing to do. And I believe that setting up an organisation such as Rara allowed us to do what was in our rightful conscience to do without contending against the law. Because, you've got the question of, yes, the scripture tells us to obey all those that are in authority. So there's a respect for authority. But what happens when you see authority figures acting unjustly? It's how do you engage that? So there was so much of a conflict that it just felt that this was the right thing to do, or the right approach, while we're still trying to establish the direction of our activism.
Yeah, no, I hear that. And I think for me, I've had those struggles as well in the past for different reasons. One, because I see when Christ came upon the earth, his focus, although there was injustice in that time, the Israelites were under Roman rulership, but he didn't really speak on that. So to me, again, it just highlighted that in everything I do, I need to make sure that I'm thinking about the eternity of man's soul before I think upon their present existence. So I will always seek for the Christian message, the gospel message to come first, or in whatever I'm doing, let it show itself, right? In some way, shape or form, because that's the most important thing. And then bring all the other important topics thereafter. But then there was also similar to yourself, the issue I had with the fact that I felt as though if I go on social media now and I speak about an issue, but I have no action, to me, I feel hypocritical.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm doing this for pride, for clout, for drawing attention to myself. It didn't feel pure. And I feel like that's the issue with a lot of social issues that, sometimes a lot of people, keyboard warriors.
Oh, people can be so
put
disingenuous.
You want to put in loads of things online, but the fact of the matter is, what are you doing?
Do you actually care?
That was what I was even looking for BLM. I said, okay, with this money that's going into this organization, what are you doing with it?
Going?
And now we've seen they didn't do much whatsoever.
No
The American BLM, anyways, there's a separation between the American and the British one, right?
Things like that. This is what I mean about so many variables. So when you say I identify with or associate with, what does that mean? If there's so many sub-organizations to this brand.
Yeah, and they didn't define
their
values and principles. They didn't state that we are against rioting, for example.
Yeah.
I was looking for that.
Or we are against violence, or we are against looting, but this is what we stand for and this is why we are, no guidance.
Exactly.
Framework.
And for me, if there's no guidance, and also, I'm sorry, I can't ignore some of the influences to some of these things. I understood that, we are close to elections. I understood that some of these things are pushed into society to cause discourse on purpose, to rile people up to say, I'm voting this way because this person didn't say exactly what I wanted them to say. Do you get what I mean? And I saw how the media was manipulating, I believe, the minds of people, including Christians, to the fact that Christians are now holding this ideology that my blackness is greater than my Christness. Do you know what I mean? And that's, I think, is also another question. How do we make sure that we focus on our Christness more than our blackness? Which should be, therefore, if we focus on being in Christ, when we see a white man, we still love him. But if we focus on being black, we're going to see a white man and something subconscious within us is going to see someone who is not my own. And we should not be doing that. As a Christian, if I walk into a church that's majority white, I should feel at home because our connecting element is Christ and not our skin tone. So I think it's a difficult battle. And I think maybe the best focus for us as Christians is to do the simple things, maybe. Continue in your word, continue in prayer, practice love, but not just to your own community. What makes you better than others if you only care for your own? What makes you better than others if you expect, to be paid back for the loan in which you give? This is what Christ was saying.
That's countercultural though, John. That's a very countercultural perspective that...
culture is bad.
Because we live in a world where you do what you do to the benefit of you. And if a space or a person doesn't serve you, you step out of there, you pursue what's best for you. But if I then put my Christ lens on, I'm doing what I'm doing for the betterment of others, to the service of others, to the building and to the edification of others. Yeah. So instantly, if I'm looking with my black lens first and I'm looking to the betterment of the black community, I've already taken off my Christ lens. So if we're sitting here with a group of Christians and half of the room identify with their race first, and then the other half identify with their faith first, that's two different conversations, John. We'll never see eye to eye on our approach. We'll never agree on the right approach to dealing with issues of injustice in our world.
But there are many who will then say, you've fallen. For example, some of the critics of Christianity in general will say you've fallen for the white man's religion. And this is where...
I've been told I'm whitewashed. I'm told, John, I've been told that I'm oppressed in the mind, that I have allowed the colonizer to brainwash me, hence my approach to injustice. I've been called all kinds, John.
Hey, I'm sure the Hebrew Israelite messages have been blinging.
Yeah. There are those that really
souls.
disagree that if you don't see the white man as the perpetrator, it's almost that you've been socialized, colonized, brainwashed to see them as such or not to see them as such, and it's just...
No, I think it's interesting because a lot of what we've brought up has made me even think about other topics we want to do in the future. Because even when you talk about the selfishness of our society today, it drew my mind to also the issues with people finding a couple, being in relationships, because it seems as though everyone is like, what's best for me as a woman? What's best for me as a man?
What does he bring to the table?
Exactly. What does she bring to the table? All those kind of questions come into it.
As opposed to what can I bring
Thanks
to
very
the
much.
table?
Because the amount of conversations I'll have or I'll hear, I'll just hear all these things about the other person.
Yeah.
Are you marriageable?
Well, that's it.
Like,
are you eligible? What value are you adding?
Exactly.
But we are always looking to be on the receiving end of value.
Hey, but let's not go too
not
far
digress.
with that one. But yeah, no, I think this has been a great conversation, one that we're gonna delve into more in the future. But yeah, no, thank you for coming on. The Truth We Know.